Can I talk to you about the NHS or what Boris likes to call his bold social care plan?
Mm.
My contention is, and I keep saying it, I reckon you'll be on my side, but I feel like the only person in the country who has realised that this Prime Minister has conned us. This is nothing to do with social care. This is a trick that he's played. He said, oh, this is my big social care reform. If you analyse the small print, it's actually a mechanism by which he's going to pour 36 billion extra pounds into the black hole of the NHS
Mhm.
money pit, and social care will not get a penny for at least another 2 years. So this is just another frightened politician scared to say no to the NHS, pouring billions and billions and billions into the money pit pointlessly because it won't have any effect.
Well, exactly. I mean, the idea that in 3 years' time he's going to turn around to the NHS and say, "Oh, do you know that money that I've been given to you for the past 3 years? Do you mind if we have that back now to spend it on social care?" By that point, Kev, it's going to have been spent on middle management in the bureaucracy, ever growing that it is, of the NHS, with diversity chiefs and all the rest of it. Do you know what, Kev? I wish I was as sure as winning the lottery. I really, really do, because that money will not see social care. And this comes at a time, right? Let's not forget that Boris made a pledge to the British people, and he said, if you vote for me, I will not increase taxes. Well, I think the only reason the public support this particular break with the manifesto and the tax hike is because they do think it's going to be going to, your average Sheila on the street, when it's really not. It's going into the black hole of the NHS, along with corporation tax hikes, right? Personal allowance freezes that were previously announced. And no doubt there'll be calls, Kev, for higher taxes still in 3 years' time when the NHS turns around and says, well, actually, we cannot give you that money back. We've spent it on some new diversity malarkey in the NHS.
Yeah, exactly. And what did we see the moment the NHS got this money? And we should stress, Darren, this 36 billion quid is extra money on top of the
Hmm.
more than 200 billion pounds it gets every year. This
Yeah.
is 36 billion quid allegedly to clear the waiting list backlog. And what did we see the moment they got the money? They advertised for a whole host
Yeah.
of executives, some of whom will be paid £270,000 a year to oversee the clearing of the backlog. They will not clear this backlog. They've taken this money and they've done what they always do. They've given it to a load of pointless middle managers with jobs descriptions you can hardly explain.
Exactly. I mean, it's utterly cartoon that these people should be paid more than the Prime Minister, right? Who ultimately is the one dealing with this backlog, the NHS backlog at the very top. I mean, no doubt, as I say, there'll be calls for higher taxes, despite the fact that they're at an all-time high since the Second World War. The tax burden's at an all-time high. And I'm really worried about the fact that you cannot discuss in this country, Kev, and no doubt, I think you and I are perhaps outliers on this, in that the rest of the country isn't willing to have the conversation about the monolithic beast that the NHS is. It devours billions like you wouldn't believe. By lunchtime tomorrow, it'll be calling for more.
Well, it did, Darren. That was the first thing they did. When Boris said, oh, in 3 years' time, we might bung a few quid at the social care system. But for the time being, after already giving it 200 billion this year, we'll give it another 36 billion. What was the NHS's first response? That's not
Mm.
enough. We want
Hmm.
3.5 billion more than that. It is the
Exactly.
monster that chews money. It is where cash goes to die. It always was. They will not sort this backlog out. And to go back to what I think was a three-card trick. I mean, I'll give Boris this. It was a clever piece of politics
Yeah.
because, we do have a broken social care system.
Hmm.
It does need to be fixed. And, of course, he was facing quite a big rebellion from his own Tory MPs because they're proper conservatives who say, well, conservatives aren't supposed to be big taxers. But, of course, when he's turned around and said, but it's for social care, it's to stop old people having to sell their houses so they can be looked after in old age. They had no choice but to vote for it. But ask anyone in social care, they're furious. They're not getting a penny.
Yeah, I mean, my heart breaks, right, for those families who have seen their elderly loved ones go through our broken social care system, right? I've no doubt that people in that sector work really, really quite hard in caring for the elderly or the infirm. But I'm afraid to say that we've got a level with the British people here. National insurance is a con job, Kev, right? People assume that it's a social insurance system that you pay into, and at the end of it, you get your care or you get a state pension. But that's not how it works, right? National insurance is just another income tax by stealth. And as it stands, it's just another form of taxation that's going to hit the poorest hardest, who are already facing a cost of living crisis with, especially this winter, by the way, inflationary pressures from the massive amount of borrowing we've just undertaken. And that will feed through on everything from fuel to food, which disproportionately hurt the very least well off in society. So I'm not convinced, as I say, that the NHS is going to turn around at the end of it and say, here you are, pet, this is for Sheila's social care. It's going to be gobbled up and spent irresponsibly on middle management.
Absolutely. Now, the thing about national insurance, you're quite right, Darren, they call it the 100-year-old con. So it was 100 years or so ago they brought it in, and they dress it up as this is how you pay for your own pension. But if you think about it, that's a non sequitur. So, for example, my mother, God rest her soul, was what they used to call a traditional housewife. So throughout her marriage to my dad and bringing us up, she never had a job. So she didn't pay any national insurance, because national insurance is linked to your employment. When she retired, she got a full pension, you see. So it isn't the way you pay for your pension. It is just another tax. And of course, you're quite right. By hiking that up, he has put the burden on younger people. Older people don't even have to pay it. So that isn't fair. You know?
Exactly. And I mean, that's not to say, there are elderly people like my grandmother, for example, who will be in a house that's worth less than £100,000 a year. And people like that shouldn't be expected to pay for, God forbid that she ever does need to use the social care system. But were she to do so, I don't think she should have to, sell up and sell the house. But we're not talking about people like that. There are a lot of pensioners in this country, Kev, who are sat on absolute fortunes as far as their houses are concerned. And I just sort of think the government's justification for this, right? They've turned around and said, oh, well, Darren and Kev, yous are wrong, right? Because NHS England is actually working already to be more efficient. The NHS is working to be more efficient about as successfully as James Corden's diet plan, Kev, right? It's utterly bizarre, that suggestion. I think that is patronising in the extreme. It actually makes me so angry that they are trying to justify and lie, frankly, to the British people. And I don't use that lightly.
It's a financial basket case. It is spectacularly inefficient. Everybody knows it. They could save fortunes if they got rid of lots of these pointless middle managers, if they started organising it in a proper business-like way. But it is not. It is an absolute mess, and it always has been. To go back to your earlier point, Darren, quite right you were too, people are terrified to criticise it because it's become our weird national religion. Why on earth did we ever go out on our doorsteps and bang pots of pans when this NHS actually let us down atrociously in the COVID crisis? But it doesn't. It's not quite so important that you or people are scared to criticising. It is important when prime ministers and politicians and cabinet ministers are terrified to criticise it. What Boris did was he abrogated, he's the latest prime minister, to abrogate his responsibility, which should be to sort this national scandal of a mess out. Instead, what they always do is just throw money at it and say, now go away, don't criticise me. So it was just another cowardly politician refusing to face up, to confront what he ought to do, which is to say to the NHS, right, we are now going to sort you out. Instead, did what all the others do. Here's 36 billion quid, off you go now.
Yeah, it's a dereliction of duty, frankly, right? Because the NHS is basically like a sieve at the minute, right? You can put stuff through it and they're just going to pour out billions and billions at the bottom there. Because I think you've got to ask yourself, do you genuinely believe that in 3 years' time with this so-called social care levy, increase of what will be from people's real earnings a pay cut because of inflationary measures as well at the minute. So you're not going to see pay increases in this country thanks to this move. Now, the government aren't going to turn around, are they, in 3 years' time and say, well, actually, 40% of day-to-day spending goes to the NHS at the minute. So we're going to cut the NHS budget and spend it instead on social care. It's a fallacy. It's an untruth. It's a lie. It's a con to the British people to tell them that that is even remotely possible. It's not. It would be political suicide and I'm afraid to say that is true, for a Conservative government to turn around and say we are making cuts to the NHS budget. It just won't happen. So once again, social care is going to be left to be the Cinderella service of the NHS, and that's simply not on.
Yeah, but you're right. And as I say, it was a big con. We've been conned.
Yeah.
It's a smokescreen for the truth. He's just kicking the NHS into the long grass, as they always do, by giving it as much money as it wants. And as I said, just to stress again, this isn't the NHS getting 36 billion quid. It is the NHS getting an extra special 36 billion pounds on top of the 200 billion it already gets to sort out the waiting list, which they will not sort out. I guarantee you that. Which brings us into the next part of our discussion, if you don't mind, Darren. I want to move on. Obviously, the Health Secretary, Sajid Javid, is probably pretty safe, but they still do keep talking about this snap cabinet reshuffle. I think Priti Patel has put herself into pole position with her latest nonsense about the migrants. She's going to change maritime law and tow the boats back to France. No, she's not. She has proved to be hopeless and ineffective in dealing with that ongoing, increasing crisis. Dominic Raab's obviously in the frame for his terrible mishandling of Afghanistan. Gavin Williamson, he's in the frame because he's Gavin Williamson. And George Eustace from DEFRA apparently is in a lot of trouble because of allowing the terrible optics of the awful business of the alpaca Geronimo being dragged screaming from that farm by idiots in hazmat suits. So you've got 4 people in the frame there. If this snap reshuffle does happen before too long, I mean, we were promised it might happen today, maybe tomorrow, who would you put first in the frame?
Well, I mean, it should be pretty obvious, right? But I think it says it all about this government. You sort of hinted at this earlier, that I've got to give it credit for the sort of Machiavellian-like scheme that it seems to have put in place to terrify the life out of cabinet ministers and ambitious backbenchers and all the rest of the parliamentary party, right? Because it's worked a treat, right? They have followed the Prime Minister through that yes lobby on this social care levy plan like you wouldn't believe. Like they'd been sort of like he was the Pied Piper and they'd gone through in a trance. I think there will be a reshuffle, but I don't think it's going to be anytime soon. I think it's going to be later this winter, because, as I say, we're going to see all of these inflationary pressures on basic essentials, energy bills, etc., disproportionately impacting the poorest, red wall seats like this one, for example. And I think your listeners will be delighted to know that they'll have energy again once the wind starts blowing, Kev. Woohoo.
Yeah, that's right.
But I mean, I don't think there's going to be a reshuffle yet before Conservative Party conference, which is in the first week of October. But I tell you what, I think Gavin Williamson's chances of survival would have been better if he'd married Henry VIII at this point.
Yes, indeed. So, going forward, you think the reshuffle, there might be some sort of reshuffle soon after the party conference, because I think timing
probably just before, just to give it a bit of a sort of oomph, because it's going to need it at that point.
Last question, Darren. Been great talking to you as always. Do you think traditional Tory voters will forgive Boris? Because this is not a Conservative government, and what he did with the NHS and under his social care pretense was just pure socialism. The way he's been behaving, the way he's been spending money, it's pure socialism. This is they say it's sort of he's a red-blue, but he's more than that. He's a sort of Labour guy, isn't he, the way he spends money?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's at this point, it's vote blue, get red or green anyway. And I'm afraid to say that I don't think he will manage to keep the support of places like this which did vote Conservative, some of them for the very first time, millions of them, in fact, for the very first time. And I'm afraid that people looking at their pay packets, looking at the fact that they're struggling, looking at the fact that, they're not going to see pay increases over the next year because it'll be wiped out entirely by inflation if the economists have got it right. People like my mother, for example, who works in the public sector, makes a living signing for deaf kids, Kev, and she's going to take a pay cut, a real terms pay cut this year, and not see any increases to her salary. And she's asking herself why she was such an idiot to support someone like Boris Johnson, right? And if you're asking yourself those questions, then I'm afraid to say what it does for trust in politics isn't ideal, because there will be people like her. She won't be a unique case. People like her asking themselves why they are being forced to put up cash for those who have got nice houses and have been comfortable throughout their lives. We're not talking about people up the road here in County Durham who've been in former mining houses. You're talking about people in Surrey, for example, who are sat on nice properties, who've done well for themselves. And it's people like my mum, Kev, who are going out to work, making an honest living, who are taking a real terms pay cut. And they're asking themselves, well, Prime Minister, how is that fair? You promised to level up. I actually think his plans at the minute are levelling down.
I agree. He's letting down people like your mum, and he's also letting down traditional Tory voters who, as you say, they voted blue, not red and green. And that's what Boris is. He's part socialist and part green lunatic.